A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. The Novelization by Jeffrey Cooper. Chapter 1. Jesse Walsh had only been living in the old house on Elm Street for a few weeks when the nightmares began. It seemed to Jesse that he was much too happy with his life to be having such spooky dreams. Admittedly, he hadn't been too pleased at first to learn that his father was being transferred to a branch office in the suburbs. Jesse was a city kid and damn proud of it. After 17 years learning how to cope with life on the mean urban streets, Jesse wasn't sure he was ready to deal with a bunch of rich kids who had never been into anything heavier than hanging out at the local shopping mall. Much to his surprise, however, Springwood had turned out to be a pretty nice place to live. Living on a clean and quiet street in a virtually crime-free neighborhood was a refreshing change from life in the big city. And leaving the house each morning with no expectation of being beaten up or robbed on the way to school was something Jesse thought he could very easily learn to live with. Even the kids at school were turning out to be a lot hipper than he had expected. It might take some time, but Jesse knew that he would eventually find his niche in the complex social structure of Springwood High. In the meantime, of course, there was Lisa Paletti. Whenever things started getting him down, all Jesse had to do was think about Lisa, and all his troubles seemed to disappear. The day he met Lisa Paletti, Jesse knew that life in Springwood was going to be just fine after all. All things considered, Jesse would have been about as contented as a teenage boy could be if it weren't for those god-awful nightmares. The nightmare he had had that morning was fairly typical. The dream started innocently enough, Jesse riding the bus home from school. It was a beautiful spring day, and everyone on the bus was glad that another week of school had come to an end. Even Joe, the bus driver, was in too good a mood to yell at the kid blasting the radio in the back of the bus. Joe never talked much, except to yell at somebody for breaking one of the rules, but he always seemed like a nice enough old guy, and most of the kids wished him a good weekend as they got off of the bus. By the time the bus reached Jesse's part of town, there was no one left on board except Jesse, the driver, and a couple of giggly girls. Jesse squirmed uncomfortably in his seat as one of the girls looked at him and whispered something to her friend. Then the two girls broke out in uproarious laughter, and Jesse felt his face flush. It suddenly grew very warm on the bus, and Jesse tried opening a window. The window refused to budge. He would have tried another window, but he already felt as if he were attracting more than his fair share of attention. He looked out the window and saw the mother and kid brother of one of the girls waiting at the side of the curb. The girl stood up, waved goodbye to her friend, and walked toward the front of the bus. She was almost at the door when the bus suddenly sped up and shot past the intersection.
"Hey!" shouted the girl. "That was my stop!"
But the bus driver paid no attention. In fact, the bus seemed to be going even faster now, almost knocking the girl off of her feet as it sharply turned the next corner.
"Hey, Joe!"
cried the second girl.
"Let us off!"
If the driver heard, he made no sign of acknowledgement. Jesse looked out the window and noticed that the weather had undergone a drastic change. The sun that shone so brilliantly just moments ago had completely disappeared. Instead, threatening clouds filled the sky, and a wicked wind was whipping the trees into a frenzy. The bus had passed the last of the houses now, and was headed into open terrain at a startling speed. One of the girls had begun to cry as her friend made her way to the front of the bus, struggling to keep her balance as the vehicle hurtled along the bumpy road. The girl was only a few feet from the driver when he stuck out his arm to throw the shift into high gear. She stopped cold when she saw that his sleeve was charred and smoking. From the back of the bus, Jesse could see the strange glove he wore, its razor-sharp talons gleaming in the darkness. And then the bus swerved wildly, throwing its passengers onto the floor. Lightning flashed and the sky had turned black as night. Thick clouds of steam poured out from under the hood of the bus as it crashed wildly through a wall of overgrown brambles on the side of the road. All hell broke loose as the bus hurtled over rocks and through ditches, leaving a trail of toppled trees in its fearsome wake. Skidding wildly across the desert landscape, the bus began to rumble and shake as if the solid earth below were about to explode. Jesse looked out the window just as the front wheel smashed into a jagged boulder and snapped off the axle. He held on for dear life as the smoke-filled bus rocked violently from side to side before bouncing to a bone-shaking halt. Slowly, Jesse and the two girls lifted themselves up off the floor. The temperature in the smoky bus was well over 100 degrees, and it was almost impossible to breathe the stifling air. Every door and window was still locked tight. And then the ground beneath the bus began to split apart, as if the planet itself was opening up at the seams. Huge chunks of land crumbled inward and toppled to oblivion, leaving the bus to teeter precariously on a narrow stone platform surrounded by nothing but a steamy abyss. Jesse smelled something burning. He looked to the front of the bus and saw that the dashboard was on fire, thick black clouds of smoke billowing to the ceiling. Then he saw the man who had been driving the bus lurch toward him, and he knew that the creature in the filthy red and green sweater was definitely not Joe the bus driver. Smoke rose from his body as if he himself had recently been on fire, and Jesse thought he saw hot globs of molten flesh dripping off the man's charred skin. And as the man walked toward the terrified passengers, his finger knives swept along the seats, leaving deep gashes in the green vinyl upholstery. Jesse knew he would never forget the horrible sound of metal scraping against metal as the horrible blades screeched against the ceiling and the steel support poles. The three teenagers shared one common desire now, and that desire was to escape from the madman in the dirty sweater. Desperately, they raced from window to window, but every window was locked. One of the girls yanked hard on the emergency door lever and watched helplessly as the lever came loose in her hand. And then the driver stood before her, his awful talon glove raised high. Jesse could see the man's horribly scarred face beneath his battered fedora hat, and he knew in that instant that the man wouldn't stop until everyone on the bus was as dead as he was. There was no way out, and Jesse knew it. No way out, that is, until his alarm clock went off and he woke up screaming as he had so many mornings before.
Why can't Jesse wake up like everyone else? Asked his kid sister at the breakfast table that morning.
Angela was 11 years old and had never had a nightmare in her life. Having her big brother wake up with a scream of terror every morning was definitely starting to get on her nerves. "Good morning," Jesse mumbled, joining his family at the breakfast table a few minutes later.
"Good morning, honey."
Despite her cheerful greeting, there was an unmistakable look of concern on Shirley Walsh's expressive face. Jesse's mother was the only one in the family besides Jesse himself who seemed to be taking the nightmare seriously. His sister had no idea why her big brother was acting so weird, and his father was of the firmly held belief that the boy was much too old to be making such a big fuss over a couple of bad dreams. "You got your room straightened out yet?" asked Ken Walsh that morning. Jesse's father was a practical man who believed in practical solutions to life's little problems. He had never been reluctant to express his opinion about anything, and it was his often expressed opinion that the only thing wrong with Jesse was that he was a lazy kid who had been spoiled all of his life by an overindulgent mother. "It's getting there," said Jesse in answer to his father's question. It was the same answer he had given to the same question every day for the past month. In point of fact, Jesse's room was still cluttered with half-unpacked boxes of junk that he had to carefully circumnavigate every time he tried weaving his way in or out of the room. "We've only been living here 6 weeks now," said his father, pointing at the boy with his fork. "I want that room unpacked by tomorrow night." Jesse nodded and yawned.
"Would you like some eggs, Jesse?" asked his mother as she slid another panful of scrambled eggs onto her husband's plate.
Jesse was about to reply when his mother noticed that Angela had thrust her hand deep into the box of breakfast cereal.
"What are you doing, dear?" she asked. "I'm trying to get the Fu Manfingers," the girl replied, spilling Fu Manchus all over the kitchen table. Jessie glanced at the cereal box and saw a cartoon of the evil Oriental villain pointing at a bowl of cereal with one of his long, pointed fingernails. Above the cartoon was the caption, "Free inside, Fu Manfingers." He gazed at the drawing of a hand wearing several of the long, red plastic fingernails and felt himself shudder. "Jessie?" He looked away from the cereal box and made a conscious effort to give his mother his full attention. "Eggs?" she said. Jessie glanced at the drawing on the cereal box for another second, and then shook his head. "No thanks, Mom," he said, wondering what it was about that picture that made him feel so uneasy. "I'll just have some milk." "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," said Jessie. "Just a little warm, I guess. It's really hot upstairs." "I know," said his mother, looking pointedly at her husband. "I wish you'd call someone to check out that air conditioning, Ken." Ken Walsh sat up straight in his chair, a butter knife clenched tightly in his hand, as if he were preparing to do battle. "I know what's wrong with the air conditioning," he insisted. "Just needs a shot of Freon is all." "Uh-oh," said Jessie, a grin on his face. "Dad's fixin' something again. Everybody hit the deck." "Don't be a smart-ass," said his father. Jessie caught his mother's disapproving look and tried hard not to laugh. "So," said his mother, eager to change the subject, "is school going all right?" "Okay, I guess," said Jessie with a shrug. "Are you making friends?" "You know how it is," he replied. Parents always asked how things were going at school, he thought, but you could never talk to them about the things that really mattered. The doorbell rang just as Angela managed to yank out a bagful of Fu Manfingers along with half a box of Fu Manchu cereal. "That's Lisa," said Jessie, jumping out of his seat and grabbing his jacket off the hook near the front door. "I better get going." "Who's Lisa?" asked his father, but the question went unanswered. Jessie was already out the door. "Your timing was perfect," Jessie told Lisa as they walked briskly toward his beat-up old Falcon. "I was getting a 3rd degree in there." "How come?" "No reason," said Jessie with a shrug. He opened the car door and the girl got in. Lisa smiled as she watched Jessie walk around to the driver's side of the car. Jessie was different from the other boys in Springwood. Lisa wasn't sure what about him was so special, but there was definitely something about Jessie that set him apart from any boy she had ever gone out with before. Not that they were really going out yet, Lisa reminded herself. Jessie had struck up a conversation with her in the cafeteria last month and found out that she lived on the other end of Elm Street. He offered her a ride to school the next morning, and they had been traveling together ever since. It was true that he hadn't asked her out yet, but Lisa knew it was just a matter of time, a formality. There was something about this new boy that she really liked, and she was pretty sure that the feeling was mutual. As much as Lisa liked Jessie, however, she had to admit that his Falcon was not the most elegant automobile she had ever ridden in. As a matter of fact, she had never seen such a battered and makeshift car before in her whole life. The body of the car was almost as much rust as metal, and the stuffing that stuck up through the front seat inside was barely held in by the cheap tape that covered most of the ripped-up vinyl upholstery. The dashboard was cracked and peeling, with gaping holes where the radio in the glove compartment used to be. In lieu of state-of-the-art stereo equipment, a cheap AM transistor radio was hung by its wrist strap like a good luck charm from the rearview mirror. Lisa was beginning to love the old heap almost as much as Jessie did. Jessie climbed into the driver's seat. He pulled a couple of bare wires out from under the dash and twisted them together. "Aren't you afraid somebody could steal your car like that?" asked Lisa. "Are you kidding?" said Jessie, turning to the girl with a big smile on his face. "This car?" He flicked on a toggle switch that stuck out through a crudely drilled hole in the dash and then pushed the button next to it. Slowly, the starter began to turn over. "Contact," said Jessie, giving a thumbs-up signal. The engine loudly backfired and then roared to life.
He threw the wobbly gear shift into first and stepped on the accelerator as the car began slowly to buck and rumble its way up the street. Jesse glanced at Lisa Paletti and broke into a grin. Bad dreams or no bad dreams, life in Springwood was looking very good indeed. Back at his home, his father was also feeling very pleased with life in the suburbs that morning. Floating on a foam chair in the middle of his small backyard pool, he sipped his coffee and took a deep breath of the fresh morning air. "Ken," said his wife, stepping out the back door and glancing at her wristwatch, "shouldn't you be getting to the office? It's almost 9 o'clock. "As soon as I finish my coffee," he said. "I'm enjoying my pool right now." He paused and took a sip of his wife's excellent coffee. "I just love our new house, don't you?" "Of course I do," she said, but the look on her face told him that something wasn't quite right. "What's the problem, Cheryl?" "I'll just be a lot happier when you finish taking down those bars," she said. Ken looked at the old house and nodded. It was hard to imagine why anyone would put heavy iron bars on every window and door in this lovely old house on Elm Street. Okay, Slashaholics, this has been Chapter 1 of A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, the novelization of the movie by Jeffrey Cooper. Not a whole lot to say so far. It's pretty much a carbon copy of the movie, which is to be expected with these Elm Street novelizations. The exception being A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors, which was written during production of the movie. So that one was a little bit different. I do expect a few little differences here and there, and I'm hoping for that. I know these stories, the novelizations of parts 1, 2, and 3, they all came in one book. So they were not shortened per se, but they were streamlined stories. The font is pretty small, so it takes up a lot, it fills up the entire page in the book. So a 90-page story would be about 150, 160 in normal font for books. So it's about these are about the length of the young adult Freddy books and the Eric Morris Crystal Lake books and the Kelly O'Rourke Halloween books. So it's not too short. But I have always enjoyed Freddy's Revenge. It's not my favorite by any means in the Nightmare on Elm Street series, but I do enjoy it more than Freddy's Dead. I like it because it had balls to be different. It was a sequel, and it dared to reimagine the whole kit and caboodle. Not saying that it worked. Not all of it worked, but it wasn't a horrible experience. It also flipped, the stereotypical character on its head. And instead of a final girl, we had a final guy in Jesse Walsh. So I'm excited to narrate this one, and I hope you all are excited to hear it, So I've already done Elm Street 1 and Elm Street 3. I kind of skipped over this one, but I'm knocking it out now, and I hope you all enjoy it, and I'll be back very soon with Chapter 2 of Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge by Jeffrey Cooper. There's also a novelization of Part 4 and 5 that I will be doing a little later on. I'm looking forward to those two. I've always enjoyed The Dream Master and The Dream Child, and I'm thinking the novelizations of that will be pretty fun too. Until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening, and
Don't forget, you've got the body, and I've got the brain.